presence of my body as the breath moves through the body. Present moment, smiling. Dear Thay, dear friends, dear family, such a happy moment to be up here and look down and just to know that our togetherness for the common purpose of education just brings me a lot of happiness. I know that so many students will benefit from this. That awareness just really just fills my body up, my heart. I'm filled. So I think just that in itself is already gives me a lot of hope, a lot of trust. Thank you for coming here and putting time to be with us. This is very precious. Today we have a few friends, wonderful. We've got together already, and just to know what they will share, I'm just grateful that they've agreed to come and just share their experience in the practice and bringing mindfulness, bringing the practice into the areas that they are involved with. I will sit up here and just be kind of timekeeper. I have this big bell here. It's not threatening, it's peace. But I will once in a while remind our friends here to, because their story is very inspirational. And of course, we live in a friends. Our brothers and sisters, the Thay and the community, Plum Village community, we are, of course, the initiative to bring mindfulness into education is maybe 3-4 years old, and it's our Thay's kind of wanting to secularize the practice and bring it into society, but keeping the who we are, which is monastics, and we are a spiritual tradition, Buddhist based, and so on. And so we are reaching out to friends and communities who are doing the same. So this is not new, and it's a real broad area, and it covers a lot. And we could never, I don't think we could do that in 6 days to cover it all. And I think what's special here that we're face to face and we get to hear from a real living being and from a heart and not on a website or something. And you'll have time also afterwards to approach our wonderful friends. So this is the living Dharma, and as they will speak from their experience. And the panel is our way of kind of reaching out and connecting and collaborating with others who are doing similar things, bringing and helping education and improving the purpose of education and creating techniques and methods to help teachers, students, as well as their parents and the whole overall. So we can't just start with the classroom, it will touch everything. And that's the core of our teachers' teaching, interbeing. When you touch one student, one teacher, you naturally will have to deal with all the other issues. And so we have here today a panel that represents a very diverse area, and they will share from their personal journey and how they have come to the point here. Without any further ado, I just introduce maybe Brother Richard here, a wonderful friend in our community. He will be introducing each member. Richard Brady is also a retired teacher, math teacher, and he's inspired many people. And to have him up here is a gift. I met his student who came to Plum Village. After many years, he came and we asked him, "Why are you here?" And he said, "I used to take a class, my math teacher, Richard Brady." And so you can see just one student's experience in a class, how later on in life he confronted suffering and he remembered the teaching and came to learn more about the practice. So you can see many stories like that, but I won't hold up the panel here. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, brother. It's my honor to introduce some old and new friends to you, and my privilege, along with yours, to hear from them this afternoon. So each will speak for about 8 minutes, not very long, not nearly long enough, but we want to leave some time for question and answers at the end. So just focus on them, and then if there are questions that come up afterwards, be ready to ask them. So our first speaker is Jack Miller from Boise, Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, where he's been involved for many years teaching holistic education, and more recently, mindfulness in particular. And let me just say, more complete biographies of each of our speakers you'll find in your booklet, so you can read that at your leisure. And hear some new things from them that are not necessarily in their biographies. Jack?
Thank you, Richard. It's an honor to be here, and I believe this meeting, this retreat, could have a tremendous influence on education in North America. And hopefully also, and I've worked in Ontario for 40 years, that it also could have a huge impact on this province, the education. So thank you for coming. We were asked to do a little of our personal story, and I'm a child of the 1960s. And as a young American, I was facing the dilemma of the Vietnam War. And the more I read about that war, I felt it was wrong for America to be involved. So I had the choice when I was drafted that I went to Canada. And the stress of that time was when I began my spiritual practice. So in 1969, I started doing yoga, and I could feel the effects immediately. And so I got interested in the philosophy behind the yoga, so I started reading in Eastern thought. And then in 1974, I started doing Vipassana meditation. And I've been doing those things since those years. And when I was doing the meditation, one of the things about the experience of meditation is you begin to experience interconnectedness, or what Thay calls inner being. And you experience it at a deeper level than just intellectually. So this is what eventually led me to holistic education. Because holistic education is about interconnectedness. And unfortunately, our education system is very fragmented. We break things into courses, into pieces, into little bits of information. And this basically causes suffering, this fragmentation. So holistic education is an attempt to have a curriculum that's connected. So I wrote a book called The Holistic Curriculum, which is about that. And there's a school in Toronto. It originally called the Whole Child School, now called the Equinox Holistic School. And we have some teachers here from that school. I was delighted to run into Kyle. Kyle, are you here? Yeah, so that is my work, is to try to bring a change in the vision of education, which is basically about people getting jobs and doing skills, rather than becoming a complete human being. And holistic education is about educating the whole person, the body, mind, and the spirit. And Gandhi said they're an indivisible whole. As soon as you try to break off one, you commit a gross fallacy. And we've committed the gross fallacy in education. So the aims of holistic education, in my view, are the development of wisdom and compassion and happiness. Wisdom and compassion. Not intelligence, but wisdom. That deep understanding of how things are. So in holistic education, what's really important, and I think in any education, is the presence of the teacher. And so much of our teacher education and even in-service education is about technique, it's about theory, but there's nothing about how to enhance the presence of the teacher. So how does one enhance the presence of a teacher? It's simple, it's through practice. It's through practice. So my practice has been meditation. So in my courses, starting in 1988, I required all my students to meditate for 6 weeks, every day. Starting 5 to 10 minutes and working up to a half an hour. And they kept a journal. They still do keep a journal, because I'm still teaching. And at the end, they write a one-page reflection. And also, I introduce mindfulness activity. I have them eat a raisin mindfully. And then for the rest of the week, do something mindfully. Take some small thing and do it mindfully. And the final thing is I'll start my classes with loving kindness meditation. This is in a public university, University of Toronto. I think one of the reasons I came to Canada, I don't think I could have done this in the US. So since 1988, I've introduced meditation to over 2,000 teachers. And to read those journals and to read that one-page reflection has just been one of the greatest joys of my life. Okay. Yeah. So I taught this summer, and I have one student that was in my summer class, and I'm really delighted to see the students that have come up to me. But I just want to read the journal of one of the students, just a few words. And the meditation he was doing was counting one to 4. So exhale 1, but inevitably you go on. You forget. So this is what he wrote. The compassion came in those simply doing nothing to start over. Compassion was experienced here and practiced on the most basic form. Compassion for myself and for my breath. To be sure, there are more life-altering and monumental expressions of compassion to be had. Perhaps this is just a seed and a strong foundation of lasting compassion to be applied and lived in any relationship with the world at large. Things, plants, animals, people, all act and leave a mark on this world, and I cannot control them. I need to be able to experience their movements and their contributions to the universe with compassion, just as I've practiced the breath compassion. Now, what a wonderful thing that this simple practice brought this deep compassion. And I've witnessed this in so many of my students. And I'm just so grateful that I've been able to do this work. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Mina Srinivasan, who's an international educator, an international mindfulness educator, where she's brought it to classrooms of both middle school and upper school. And she has quite a bit to say about how to bring mindfulness into the classroom and much experience doing so. Mina?
Thank you, Richard. I'd like to begin from a space of gratitude. Gratitude to all of my teachers and to everyone who helped make this conference a reality. And of course, gratitude to all of you, because there's so many other places you could be right now, especially during summer vacation, yet you chose to be here and to spend a week sharing in the practice of mindfulness. And I think that this mindfulness and education movement is really signaling a pedagogical shift, and a shift towards authenticity, and one that's infused with relationships, and a shift towards the whole child that was so beautifully spoken about. And it's just a real gift to be here and to share in that with all of you. Early on in my career as an educator, well, first of all, I became a teacher, like many teachers, because I had this motivation to want to serve and to want to contribute and to want to make the world a better place in some way. And early on, I was at a conference, and I had encountered this pretty well-known Thai intellectual named Sulak Savarska. Some of you may have heard of him. He's a well-known engaged Buddhist, and I was asking him something theoretical about social emotional learning, and he just looked at me and he said, "My dear, a good teacher must first be happy," and I'm going to quote Auden and not the Buddha. And I had read Parker Palmer, I had read about, teachers teach who they are, but it really wasn't until I had encountered the Plum Village mindfulness practice that I was able to touch that piece in myself and really understood how the teacher transmits their presence. A good friend of mine once wrote that the unwritten curriculum in the classroom is the teacher's presence. And through the practice, I was able to get tools and ways in which I could really cultivate that happiness, that joy within myself. And I, of course, was really eager to go back and share it with my students. But what Thay really emphasized was that the way in which you really share it is through your way of being, and start there. And then you'll develop that authenticity where when you're sharing mindfulness practices, they come rather naturally. So I'm going to share one story of transformation that happened in my classroom teaching, and then, with time permitting, share some specific practices that I share with my students. So I was teaching in Oakland, most recently in Oakland, California, for the past 2 years, at a progressive school where the organization Mindful Schools started. So I was in a really wonderful space to be sharing the practice. And before that, I taught at a international school in India, where we had actually a group of educators that met weekly to share in the practice. And in India, I had this unique experience of being an expat, but obviously, looking very Indian, having an Indian name, and having Indian heritage, but being the only teacher in the school that was of Indian heritage, but that was American. And I had one student who was this adorable, sweet little boy. I was running an academic support program, and in the process of hiring an assistant. And when I shared with the students that I was hiring an assistant, this boy said, "Oh, is it going to be an Indian person?" And in that moment, I could just feel so much pain inside myself, and really touching the space of, having felt discriminated against growing up and feeling like an outsider. And before the practice, I probably would have said to him, "That's unacceptable. You can't say that." I would have kind of reacted. But because of the practice, I went to my breath. I recognized what was coming up, and I was able to respond and not react, and ask him, "Well, William, why wouldn't you want to hire someone Indian? Talk to me about that." And I realized it's because you know, he didn't want to come to India. He's there because of his dad's job, and he had difficulty understanding the accents. And it's nothing about me being Indian, but here I am, you know, immediately going to that place. And I share that story because it was a really powerful moment for me, where the practice made me realize that it helped me really develop compassion and understanding in myself and not react, and really look at my student as another human being and not this sort of teacher-student relationship. I think sometimes mindfulness can be sold, it can get kind of gimmicky as like stress reduction, increasing focus, increasing attention. But this path that we're on when you're practicing mindfulness, it's about awakening, it's about liberation, it's about dissolving those identities of teacher and student and really developing authentic relationship. And in that moment where I had this interaction with this boy in my class, I realized the power of the practice. And the way in which I share the practice with my students, I do a lot of things with them, most recently teaching middle school. I start every class with inviting the bell. And again, you know, two things I can offer from what I've learned with sharing the practice is to always frame it as an invitation, especially with young people, you know, to never be dogmatic about it, but always frame it as an invitation. And authenticity is so key. And when you're being authentic, you know, the kids are more apt to really be present and to be engaged and to be available. So I'll start the class by saying, okay, you know, our bodies are here, but where are our minds? Our minds could still be in math, our minds could still be at lunch, so let's just take a moment and invite the bell and come back to ourselves so we can be here. And it's really helpful for me as a teacher. Teachers, I read once somewhere that we make more decisions during the course of the workday than any other profession except surgeons. No wonder we're so exhausted at the end of the day. So taking that time for me with my students at the start of class is tremendously helpful. I also do deep relaxation with them. I only wanted to do it like once every 2 weeks because of we had so much that we needed to get through, but they put together a petition. These are 6th graders, and they said, we want deep relaxation at least once a week. Beginning anew is another practice that you're going to learn about, and I use that to mediate conflict, and also I use it with my students when I one-on-one conference with them, so we can kind of have a clean slate with each other, and also own up for any unskillfulness I've had. And again, that's the authenticity piece, you know, naming when you yourself as a teacher have been unskillful, I think is really powerful. The practice of loving kindness, oftentimes I also start class with that. And I just really happy to be here. And if you have more questions about putting it into, integrating practices into the classroom, you can feel free to find me anytime.
Thank you, Mina. Our third speaker is Michele Chaban, also from the University of Toronto. And she is a co-founder and co-director of the Interprofessional Applied Mindfulness Meditation Certificate, which has 5 different strands. It's a very large program, and she's the one who got it going. And Michele, why don't you share with us why don't you take that one? We'll work from that side.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to begin with offering a blessing to you, for those of you who are teachers formally, and for the rest of us who teach informally. May you be well. May you be healthy. May you be whole every day. May you be happy. May you be supported from within and about you. And may you continue with your good work, because together we will change the world. I'm so pleased to be here with you today, and I guess we've been asked to speak a little bit about ourselves, so here I go. I used to be a model for Elizabeth Arden Canada, and it was a wonderful life. And then one day a drunk driver ran into me and took my legs and my arms away from me. In the years that ensued, I lost my ability to talk and walk. I kept my mind, and I lost my body. And science didn't have the resources to be able to help heal me, and I waited. And I studied white ceilings for a good 8 years before the fMRI was developed. In the process of that, there was no pain management in the Toronto area. And there was tremendous suffering in my body. That one body could produce so much suffering was an amazing thing to me. And you have a choice in that kind of suffering about whether you're going to stay alive, go mad, or do something different with it. And so I decided that what I'd do is I'd study suffering, and that I was a case of one, and I had lots of academic work that I could do every single minute of every day. So rather than the fight, flight, faint kind of approach that people often have to stress, I in fact stepped into the stress, held it as one would hold a child or a brand new puppy, and started to look at how it changed me and made me. And I appreciated every moment, and it was like a snail walking on a razor's edge. Every single move hurt. When they finally got to the point that science had developed enough knowledge to know what was going on with me, they asked me how I'd endured and how I had not gone mad. And I was able to say, well, in the process of all of it, studying suffering, I took my pain and I tried to shift it around a little bit. I used my mind inside myself to try and see where there was a place that there was no pain, where there was an empty spot. So I have to say that the practice of mindfulness meditation came to me through a drunk driver, and I'm deeply appreciative for him and all that he's done. When I started walking again in my mid-30s, they asked me what it is I wanted to do, and all I had was a tremendous degree in suffering. So I took that and I went into palliative care, and there's some people here today who remember my work in palliative care, and I would speak about how the kind of work that we do with the dying, which was pharmacare, grief and bereavement, was wholly inadequate. That this is an experience in life that's so profound that we need to be able to work with it differently. So I started using mindfulness meditation in palliative care and got results that were absolutely remarkable. I became a teacher in palliative care. So I'm a theologian and a social worker, but I worked at the Faculty of Medicine, Faculty of Social Work, Center for Bioethics, and the Dalai Lama School of Public Health. And I tried very hard to start to bring changes in the system, and we succeeded for a while. And then finally I left at the age of 55, and at about the 6-week mark into my retirement, University of Toronto phoned and said, would you come and teach a mindfulness meditation course, just 1 or 2 courses. And I thought I was kind of smart, and I said, yeah, I can do that with my eyes closed. And they didn't get the joke, but I thought I was being brilliant. So anyways, we started, and because I have a disability, I asked a colleague to teach with me because there are days that I just can't walk and days that my voice isn't so good, so I always work with a colleague. And so we started off, and that was 8 years ago. We had no money, and what we had to do was we had to make sure we had enough students to be able to pay the teachers. So I think that's one of the important lessons for you to think about. We keep waiting for money and permission to do this work, and you don't have to do that. You just have to step into it, and you have to find a way to integrate it. So whether you do lunch and learns for the teachers, whether you do after-school programs, whether you integrate it into the teachers' morning coffee, however you're going to do it, there's so many different ways to be able to start to integrate mindfulness and mindfulness meditation. Jack is right that if you teach the teachers, then it'll be contagious and it'll go right through the classroom. So now I teach at University of Toronto, and I also teach at McMaster. So 2 universities have asked for a mindfulness meditation program. That's remarkable. And why are they asking? Because they realize that in healthcare in particular, not that education isn't our issue, but my program is to address interprofessionalism, which includes education, but largely it's a lot of healthcare professionals. We're suffering. I would say that right across the board, society is suffering. I think the world is suffering. And we have forgotten how it is that we are to attend to suffering. And so this is my goal. And I have 60 workshops at University of Toronto. And there are 40 faculty, many of them who are here today. Okay, go ahead, hit the dong. And saw you. That's another thing mindfulness can do for you. It just allows you a larger vision because your perceptual field changes. So I want to say to you, this is easy. And you can't be stuck in your demoralization. And we're all feeling demoralized. And when you start to think back to the early work of Thay around the Vietnamese War, or Martin Luther King, who he walked with, you can imagine their demoralization around seeing so many people injured. We have gone the longest of any civilization without war. And Steven Pinker actually says that we're becoming more peaceful, believe it or not. So read Better Angels of Our Nature and believe the statistics. In Toronto, the crime rate has gone down. I'm not saying that it's because 40 faculty are teaching the world how to meditate, but Toronto is not a place that the crime rate should be going down. So I'm not going to put those two statistics together, but they certainly are curiosities. So just imagine the change that you can bring, and you don't have to wait for funding. You don't have to do anything more than just start the practice yourself. And you've started it already, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So in closing, I'm going to say, my 5 streams that are at University of Toronto are mindfulness and psychotherapy, East and West, so that we look at integrating Eastern and Western concepts so that you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Mindfulness and contemplative education. Mindfulness in the mind at work. In other words, how we can work more efficiently and effectively by breathing and being mindful. And we're seeing the embracing of that at very significant NGOs and corporate cultures. We also have the embodied mind, which is part of what Thay talks about, and Dan Siegel, and that is yoga and the mindfulness, which is being used in psychiatric facilities in downtown Toronto. And then the last one is contemplative art, using art to be able to bring our attention home. So I'm going to finish there and say thank you very much. And again, much gratitude to the faculty at University of Toronto, as well as to McMaster for their brilliance, their insight, their courage to be the change that we wish to see.
Dear friends, let's listen to one sound of the bell and enjoy our breathing and just simply breathing. Smile to ourselves.
Thank you, Michele. Our next speaker is actually one of Michele's teachers in her program, Theo Confler, who, besides teaching in the program at the University of Toronto, is the founder of Mindfulness Without Borders, which has done really wonderful work in very troubled countries around the world, and has now come back to Canada. Theo.
Thank you, Richard. I feel so much of my story is part of the stories that you've heard so far, and I can't wait to hear what happens towards the end. But I just want to start off by telling you that my heart swells with excitement when I look out to you 1,300 educators, I think, in this room, all interested in bringing mindfulness into your lives, taking it into your professional worlds, into education or healthcare, or wherever you are situated. And to know that in 2005, I was part of a small group of people that developed the first ever symposium for contemplation and education, and we were 35 people around the table. And thanks to Thay and his wonderful community, here you are, being offered the opportunity to explore mindfulness, discover it for yourself, and bring it on home. So I'm just so terribly blessed and pleased and grateful at the same time to be here with you. So as you've heard, we've all been asked to tell a little bit about how we got into mindfulness. So my purpose today is to tell you that, and how not only did I arrive to mindfulness, but how certain passion developed out of my circumstance to create some social impact and bring mindfulness out into the world. In 1985, I was diagnosed with lupus. And for those of you who don't know what lupus is, it's an autoimmune deficiency disorder. And I can only say that outside of the horrendous physical pain, every aspect of who I was gone, like the water going down the drain. I just didn't know who I was any longer. And I had been working and living in Israel. I had very little family support. And coming from Toronto, Canada, I had very little experience, if almost none, on living in a country of conflict that was fragmented by war and violence. And so I was quite suspect that a lot of the stress that came out of that was really the catalyst to my lupus. I couldn't get any Western doctor to agree to that, but that's besides the point. So I was in tremendous pain, and it was very, very debilitating. And at the risk of getting dramatic, had it not been a girlfriend who walked into my living room with this little white book by Thich Nhat Hanh called Peace is Every Step, I'm not so sure I'd be here today. It changed my life. I went that summer to Toronto. I bought another book called The Miracle of Mindfulness, and it set me free. I came back to Israel because I was living there at the time. I had 2 children, and I went to my doctor and I said, no more medicine. I think I have the key. I started meditation, Tai Chi, a macrobiotic diet, and I practiced breathing, and staying centered in the present moment as opposed to resonating into my own story, my challenges, and so on and so forth. And mindfulness really helped me navigate the obstacles in my life. So as time unfolded, I started to feel better. And in fact, my greatest obstacle became my greatest gift. How about that? I'm sure you've all experienced that. I'm sure my story is similar to many of your stories, but it ended up that this obstacle, this lupus, was the gift that allowed me to open up and bring mindfulness to others. So it wasn't that I wanted my experience to be heard to others, but what I did want to do was discover and explore what is the role and the relationship of mindfulness, not just in everyday living and healing, but in countries of conflict, where societies are fragmented, where people are growing up in conditions that are horrific. And so I went to Rwanda and did a mapping report and found out that actually these societies that are generally fragmented by war really want to build community. And what better tool than using mindfulness as a way to bring people back to the present moment? So after being very encouraged to bring mindfulness into healthcare in Rwanda, actually in Kigali, and only in a select number of NGOs, just to give this all proportion, one small step at a time. After our workshops there, we then went to Nigeria and to Uganda, and we found that everywhere we went, what mindfulness was doing was unlocking the human potential of people unable to look at their lives as they are in the present moment because they're so stuck and horrified by their past. So when we were in Rwanda, one of our teachers said, why don't you do this for youth, especially youth in Rwanda, because when they transition out of high school, it's not like a lot of them go to higher education as they do in Canada and the States and in other developed countries. And I thought to myself, well, there's a good idea. How about Mindfulness Without Borders not only develops programs for healthcare providers, professionals, and the adults that surround youth, but let's do something for youth as well. And in time, with a group of wonderful practitioners and educators and lay people and younger generation thinkers, we developed curriculum called the Mindfulness Ambassador Council. And what separates us, I believe, from a strictly mindfulness curriculum is that we wed social and emotional competencies into the program. So it's 12 weeks. We teach and facilitate conversations in a council where we value everybody's voice equally, where there's no discrimination, and where we appreciate diversity and where we build self-esteem, and more than ever, where we hear people. We hear anyone who's in our council, we hear their voices and we value them. So our core values of the organization, our core concepts of mindfulness, our programs that we build are core concepts of mindfulness, and we start off with breathing. We start off with using the breath to bring us into the present moment. We move into understanding and talking about some of the challenges that prevent us from being our best selves. We develop conversations around being compassionate, empathetic, and understanding, and all through the council process where we just deeply listen to one another. So it's been a remarkable journey, and I think that if we all begin to take what we know best, model mindfulness to others, and advocate for that together as a community, I think we'll be stronger. I know we're in 23 sites at the Toronto Catholic District School Board, and had it not been for two lovely women who are here, Rita Mamon and Diane Benasco, we would have never gone as deep as we have there. And we plan to expand our roots, and we look to you as advocates. So thank you, and if you want to learn more, we have faculty here, and we're in the bookstore there. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you, Theo. We're going to have one bell. Our next speaker will be Kristian Salunga. John is a classroom teacher in a high school in San Diego, teaches English, and like many of you who teach in public schools, it's probably not so easy to actually teach a practice, so that may not be the door you come in. So we'll hear from John about the door he has entered.
I wrote a little something for all of us here, so I just wanted to read that, and I have some other notes too, but I'll be talking and stuff. Dear beloved educators, I am writing just to say I see you. I see you and recognize the fullness of your life of service, your expertise, your care and hard work, your wakefulness, your sacrifice, your great offerings found day in and day out in your classrooms, in your lecture halls, in your offices. I see you here. I see you breathing in and out, connecting with this source of innate wisdom, peace, and power within ourselves called mindfulness, our inner curriculum, I see you breathing in and out to give birth to the change, to be the teachers you wish to see in the world. I see you here. Breathing in, I am aware of the daily acts of compassion you contribute in the world through your classroom. All the seen and unseen things you hold, you endure, you balance, you tolerate, you skillfully negotiate to keep open the paths of possibility, promise, and potential for all our youth. Breathing in, I bow deeply to your immeasurable generosity, fortitude, and creativity. I see you, I know you are here, and I am happy. May we be fully present to engage the collective shifts and transformations taking place during this time, this ripe time on our planet, and may we courageously and creatively participate in bringing the heart back to the art of teaching. May we breathe this new life in ourselves and our work in the most creative, affirmative, expressive, or subtle of ways in countless places for the benefit of our students, our communities, and the planet. I offer a lotus to you, the Bodhisattva educator in you. Thank you for being here. I work at a high school in San Diego, and I wanted to just share my experience of practicing and bringing in the mindfulness practice more to myself and my work. Not necessarily to share with the students, but bring in the field of my own work into my scope of view for mindfulness. So I'm going to share some things that I've learned from that, and maybe it might be helpful. I work in, I guess what we call, sometimes like an inner city school. I work with 95% students of color, African-American students, Latino students, Filipino, Southeast Asian, Somalian students. So I'm just sharing that because that's the context from where I teach. That's sort of my cushion. And I'm just sharing today, I have 10 years of teaching, so I know there's a lot of other experienced educators here, so it's more just to share my process and to enter into dialogue. So I guess I'll use a little bit of teacher talk. I'll start with an essential question. That's kind of things that we say in our world, right? So what shows up when I bring my work life into the field of view of my mindfulness practice? And actually one of the things that I've been experiencing is, there's actually a lot of unlearning I feel like I'm doing. A lot of the habit energy that are part of schools, part of our work, kind of unlearning that, the way that we're unlearning maybe our relationship to eating very fast, or even just walking and taking for granted the walking that we do. So I feel like, maybe it's contradictory, but I feel like bringing my work into my mindfulness practice actually invites me to do a lot of unlearning, a lot of moving against the habit energy of how schools function. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I feel like that's kind of one of the things I'm finding out. One of my main motivations, excuse me, for doing this is, I guess I feel like there's a lot of things that are difficult about being a teacher. There's a lot of things that are difficult about working with students in terms of where they are. And so I think one of the things that Thay shared in the very beginning of the retreat was about the mindfulness of suffering. And I know we all know some of the things that are complicated about that, but I feel that there's a way to look into the students and to ask ourselves, or to ask myself, like what's really happened. So in California, maybe other parts of maybe where you teach, things have gotten, I feel like, to the point where we're doing a lot of work, we're doing a lot of teaching work, but I'm not really quite sure like what's actually being received by the students. I feel like there's a lot of busyness that teaching and learning can look like. We're very busy, we're giving this, we're doing that, computers are out. But like, what are actually students getting? What are we actually cultivating in young people? So I feel like that's kind of a hard question. But I think in my mindfulness practice, I feel like that's kind of what I'm being asked to look at that. So young people aren't only test scores. But that's the thing that the conversation at my school, that's kind of the conversation that we're wedded to. So, I feel like the mindfulness practice gives me an opportunity not to feel overwhelmed by that, but to look at it very clearly, so that I can understand how to respond. Okay, I can understand how to respond. So for instance, this might just be a small example. One of my students, he was, sometimes hanging out at lunch, and one time he said, why do you always say, good afternoon to your 5th period class, And I guess I didn't really think much of it, and I said, I guess I just want to say that. And he was saying, because I don't ever hear that in my classrooms. And I guess I just feel like, to me, that's kind of a moment for me to listen to what are the experiences that young people are having in the classrooms. And sometimes, once again, I don't know, hopefully your work environments are much more healthy. I think sometimes schools are just very transactionary. For young people, you do your part, I do my part. Okay, don't get in my business, I won't get in your business, right? Time passes, turn something in, okay, and then bye-bye, bell rang. And so we're kind of in this thing, this almost like fantasy world that we're doing this schooling thing. But what's really going on? What kind of young people are we really preparing for the planet that we live in, for the communities that they live in? So I don't know, I guess I feel like my mindfulness practice kind of brings me closer to this conversation. And I have to teach, right? The curriculum is not outside of this. I think there's ways we can definitely skillfully use curriculum, the choices that we make, so that they nourish the young people. We don't just cover them with stuff, right? This is sort of the thing, right? We just deliver the lesson in these types of languages that we have in the schooling. So I guess as I'm sharing here, I think there's this moment where touching and really looking clearly at what's there. And then that also begins to tell us what's not there. And that begins to inform our practice in terms of other ways of being that we can occupy and what we can offer into the classroom in the midst of the essay and the pre-writing and the brainstorming and all the things that we're doing. So, I work in an English reading and writing classroom, so I guess, I've been looking at how mindfulness is almost, it's an expression of literacy, of reading. What do you see? What do I see as a teacher? Do I just see a student? Do I see somebody that I don't like? Do I see kind of my own perceptions and live through those perceptions? What am I listening to? What can I hear? Do I have even space to hear? Maybe I feel really overwhelmed. So I just hear the noise and I get aggravated, right? And I lash out, okay? So I think, I'm kind of just using my professional practice and the language around teaching, all the educationese and things, and trying to disrupt that a little bit, to try to wrestle it back. Just like what we're doing here, once again, I think we're trying to reclaim walking so that it's nourishing for us and not just this thing that ends up wasting our energy, aggravating. So, in your classrooms, all the things that you do in your classrooms, so many tasks, right, just to even get started in the day. I don't know, when you get into your classroom, what are some things that you can do to repurpose, re-energize, reuse, re-strategize, steal, adapt that moment for yourself. So for instance, we just got new computers, so I have to check them every day. So I can make that really aggravating for myself, or I can sit, get my chair and sit there and breathe and take my time, right? Sweeping my classroom. I don't know, these are kind of things that I have to do, but do I get angry, like, oh, the kids, they don't know the trash can, da 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 da, Or I take my time. I don't have to think, right? Even better, just sweep. You know what I mean? And I'm energizing myself while I'm doing that. I don't know, I don't know if that's helpful, but I think, finding times during your day, standing in the copy room. Thank you, brother.
One bell. Let's find some time.
Sorry? Okay, I'll go a little bit more. So, yeah, I think there's this way to, oh, move.
I'll invite one side.
2 minutes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So
Thank you, John. I think this brings up a question that many of us have, which is that if we bring mindfulness into our classroom, will there be less time for the other things? So the answer is no. Katherine Weare is a professor at Exeter University in UK. She's been very involved with the social emotional learning, creating curricula, and more recently has been involved with the creation and evaluation of the .B mindfulness curriculum, which was developed for secondary students in England by mindfulness practitioners who are teachers in the secondary schools. So, Katherine?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. I am, as you gather, from England, so I hope you'll understand the accent. And it's great to be here, and looking at this great crowd of people can make you feel quite jumped up, really, about yourself and feel you're very important to be sat on this stage. I went home once after a do like this, and I said to my son, who was in the kitchen, I had a great time. I said, somebody came up to me afterwards and said, I could listen to you talk all day. And he said, only because they don't have to. But I'm afraid you have to for 7.5 minutes or whatever I have left. Okay, like everyone here, I guess I have a mindfulness story, and it's very similar, actually, to some of the earlier ones. I was sailing along as a very successful, in inverted commas, academic. I'm English, so I find claiming to be successful difficult. We're very self-deprecating, but I was doing okay and kind of tipped for stardom as a deputy vice-chancellor and all that. And then I got a nasty condition, rather like lupus, an autoimmune condition called complex regional pain syndrome, and I hope no one here ever gets it, but if you do, it's similar, horribly painful. And I just was outraged at this, really. I was in terrible pain and couldn't walk very well, and my life was being very, narrowed by this. And my reaction to this was just to feel outraged that, my life was being spoiled in this way. And actually, oddly enough, I became quite suicidal in a kind of petulant sort of way. What's the point of life, really? You know what I mean? Why, this isn't right. And I really became quite depressed about this. And discovered mindfulness, which actually, to be serious for a minute, really did save my life, and it gave me my life back. I took early retirement from a job that was driving me nuts, and decided to retrain in mindfulness at the University of Exeter. Now, my job before this was in social and emotional learning, and I was training to be a mindfulness instructor of adults, and it suddenly occurred to me that there might be a link between mindfulness for adults and mindfulness for kids and social and emotional learning. I don't know why it took me so long to work that one out. But I then started developing work on mindfulness in schools and discovered, of course, there was a lot already happening. So, as has been said, I got involved in a major program in the United Kingdom, which is a lovely program called .B. I became involved with the work of Thich Nhat Hanh by muscling my way into a educators' retreat in London. I was a substitute for the people who were supposed to turn up, so I keep hoping they'll turn up and take over. But and I've recently been advising the Mind and Life Institute, where the Dalai Lama is developing a very similar kind of initiative to wake up schools. So I'm, again, rather like your car driver, in a way I thank the condition I got. And it's strange, really, how life can turn out and how suffering can turn into such good, I guess. Anyway, to stop talking about myself, which, as I say, the English find very difficult. You guys find it easy, but we feel embarrassed by all this heart stuff, so I'll get more pragmatic now. And in a sense, just give you a few messages from what I guess I've gathered with working with people in schools, particularly in Europe, but across the world really. I think it's been said many times, but this is essentially about you as teachers and educators and administrators. And just to add a thought to that, which is to bring this kindness and compassion to yourself, including the bits where it doesn't work very well and where you're not as mindful as you should be. Because we really need not to turn mindfulness into another ought, so that if we don't practice, we then feel very guilty. And I know some of the adults I teach, when they stop practicing for a while and get back into it, their first rumination that they're sat there with is, why don't I do this more often? It's awfully good for me. I'm a really bad person that I don't keep this up. So let's be kind to ourselves, including when we don't be as mindful as we should be, and not turn mindfulness into another ought, because we can do that if we're not careful. I guess I'd advise you to get support and to say that, of course, there is a great deal of it about, really. There is a lot of mindfulness happening in many ways and under many titles. So let's not get obsessed with any particular approach or sect or language. Let's reach out to people in social and emotional learning. There's many mindfulness programs happening at the moment, very good curricula being already developed. If you want to know what's around, go on the Garrison website. There's 37 programs to draw on, and lots of fascinating stuff around. I think we should really see science as an ally, not the enemy. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here, but I think things like randomized controlled trials can be our friend, not our enemy. And I say that as someone who's just been part of a group who published a randomized controlled trial on the .B program and found some very effective changes in terms of stress and anxiety and so on. Neuroscience is our friend, not our enemy. I think we don't want too much dualism here. We don't want to start thinking nice people teach mindfulness and nasty people teach physics and maths. And it's the same in classrooms, I think. And I'm going to take my 2 minutes just to say another couple of things, if I may. I guess the final thing I want to say, really, is to make sure that we bring mindfulness to people, not expect people to come to it. And to be aware that for some people, the kind of stuff we do is very off-putting and very weird and very odd. And that we need to start where they are, not where we'd like them to be. And if we want to talk to teens, for example, it may be that singing songs about flowers is not going to go down well with some tough teenagers. Dare I say? Do I get any more minutes for laughter time? No, okay. And just to make sure that we express things in ways that are in the language and the imagery and use things like film and pop music and so on to really appeal to teens. Similarly, if we're talking to administrators, let's start where they are. Let's talk the language of stress and number of days saved if people learn mindfulness, not expect them to get into the spiritual side. They'll get there. It's a path. We can start anywhere, as people have said. And an image I quite like is that of being a Trojan mole, if you excuse my mixed metaphors, that what we're trying to do is to get into schools and universities any old how, and then the process does the work, really. But I'll just finish with the story about how off-putting mindfulness can be to some people. I have a lovely colleague, a very eminent professor at the University of Exeter called William Koiken, and his daughter said to him after he came back, after one of these kind of do's, saying how well it went, she said, "You do know, Dad, don't you, that mindfulness is for losers?" And he said, "Okay, you sure about that?" She said, "Yep." And then she phoned him up a while later. She said, "I just want to clarify that a bit." And he thought she was going to say, "I don't really mean it, Dad." She said, "I just want you to know that it's not just me that thinks that." And this is a girl who's experienced it in the home and so on. She's a teenager. Anything the parents do is automatically awful. But just important, really, to start where people are and to make sure that we do this in ways that appeal to people and don't just gratify our own egos. Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Katherine. Our last speaker is John Bell, who's the Vice President of Youth Build USA. He's had a long career working with young people in leadership development and a variety of different kinds of settings. And so we'll hear more about what he's doing from John.
Dear Thay, dear friends, let's just see who's in the room first. How many here are classroom teachers? If you raise your hand. Wow, just take a look around. Wave to each other. How many here are school leaders or school administrators? Wave to each other. How many work with young people outside of school settings? Yes. Okay, wave to each other. How many would like to be working with young people? All right. How many of you are parents? Woo, look at that. All right, well, I work with young people who have dropped out of the school systems. People from low-income backgrounds, ages 16 to 24. And what they say to us in the youth build programs that they come into is, they didn't care about us in school. Nobody cared about me. So I just want to say, from all the young people in Youth Build, the tens of thousands who've been in Youth Build, who've experienced good teachers, as I think most of you probably are, I know that you started, John, your blessing to them was very appropriate. You started your career because you wanted to make a difference. I know that. And I want to, from all the people who, young people in Youth Build who know that teaching makes a difference, I am a stand-in for them to say thank you very much. It does make a difference. Now I'm going to bring into some voices of some of the young people we work with. There are 3.5 million young people who are between ages 16 and 24 who are out of school, out of work, and raised in low-income communities. Here's one of them, Mike Dean. Well, so much for order. Okay. Mike's in here somewhere. Okay. Staples are very useful. Mike says, I never had an easy year growing up in Columbus, Ohio. I lived in a drug-infested home without a father. My neighborhood was drowned in confusion and negativity. The lack of positive goals and dreams led me to a life of crime. I dropped out of high school with a baby on the way. I had no home, no money, and no help. I put my hope into crime in the streets. At a time that seemed was my only option. Crime in the streets eventually led me to jail. I came close to death many times. The loss that changed, the loss that changed my life was the death of my younger brother, violent death of my younger brother. That was 1967. Mike then found his way to Youth Build program in Columbus, Ohio. And today, what is this, 14 years later? He is the director of his own Youth Build program. He's a minister of his own congregation. He's the owner of his own construction company. He has a family and 4 children, and he owns his own home. There are millions of young people who had these aspirations. They want the same thing that you or I want. They want to know their true nature. They want to know their value. They want to make a contribution, and they want to be able to support their families and be happy and safe, right? Yet, because of poverty and racism, they have been denied that opportunity. And the schools have failed them, and you all who work in some of those schools have tried your best to counteract that. So Youth Build developed as a place for them to land. We started, my wife and longtime partner, Dorothy Stoneman, who's right here, started Youth Build in 1978 in East Harlem, New York. We asked young people, if you had some adult backup and some money, what would you do? John Thay looked across the street and said, I'd like to fix up that building, abandoned building. It took us 5 years to do that first building. Starting there step by step, there are now 273 youth build programs in the country's poorest communities, and in 16 other countries like South Africa, Serbia, Haiti, Mexico. They asked us to come to Afghanistan lately. I said, wait, get your thing together first, then we'll think about that. They spend about a year in the program going to school, getting their GED or diploma, half the time that and half the time building affordable housing for low-income people, learning leadership skills. And in this process, they reclaim their lives. Now, here are some of the elements that I think work, and we know about them here. One is caring and love. They come in pretty beat up by racism and poverty. And when I train staffs who work with these programs, I use Thay's story, and some of you may have heard this. He talks about the, would you hold the mic for me for a minute so I can demonstrate this? He talks about the flowers that, no, for me. Okay, there we go. So Thay, a little bit more over this way. That's it. Okay. I'll get closer to you. Okay, good. So Thay, Thay talks about the flowers like tulips that close up at night, and every morning the sun comes out, beams down. This is not working. The flower's here, the sun is here.
What do you want me to do?
Okay. And where the sun beams down its photons indiscriminately on the flower, and its nature is to open up. And I say to the staffs who work with young people, the young people come in like this, all closed up. And our job as teachers and parents and youth workers is to beam down love and respect indiscriminately, no matter what they've done. And they begin to test it out. They begin to test it out. Sometimes they go like that. All right? Sometimes they go like that. Sometimes they'll go like that again. But our job, it is their nature to open to their own health, and they will move towards that. Sometimes it takes years, and we know that. We get letters from students 10, 15 years out of youth build saying, thank you. I couldn't get it then, but now I know. Thank you. So respect and caring. One is going beyond what they expect. For instance, they say to us, well, you know, they came and got me. They knocked on my door when I couldn't come up, when I didn't get up for school. They sat by my mama's hospital bed when my mom was in coma. They came and got me out of jail when I got busted for stupid stuff over the weekend. Nobody ever did that for me before. Nobody cared about me. So that thing that Thay says goes in order to go out. It comes in from the staff, the caring teachers, the people like yourself first, unremittently, fiercely, constantly, pouring that love and attention and going beyond their expectations to care about them, to care about them. Here's a poem by Trevor Daniels, a Youth Build student. He was at a conference and saw all people like you talking about the program and how they wanted to help it. He wrote, from being lonely and getting blunted to seeing concern and feeling wanted. From hating you because you stared to loving you because you cared. In the pain, I'm in the struggle. I need to talk, I need to hug you. I hope that you feel my heart in these words. Now picture the youth that stand on the curbs. They have no hope and see no change. They try to leave but stuck in their ways. 16 years old and suicidal. You may not relate, but trust me, I do. I reminisce about my cries for help. No one noticed that I hated myself. As time went on, a lost soul grew and was welcomed by those who cared for the youth. I know there's more that you want me to be. I'm still in the dark, but the light I can see. Let it be known, I love what you do. From now till forever, I'll pray for you. So, everything that everyone has said is part of the picture, right? Taking care of ourselves, appreciating each other, knowing that we can't do it all in one step, taking the step by step, pouring out the love. Mother Teresa, I once heard a quote said, she says, love until it hurts and then love some more. I think that's what we're called to do. And the more that we take care of ourselves, the more of our natural love we have available to share with students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you all. Thank you all. We now have about 25 minutes for question and answer. Please, there's a microphone in the center aisle. Please make your questions brief. The answers also made brief, be brief. Please ask your question of the whole group, and whoever feels led to respond will do so. It may be that no one feels ready to respond, and your question needs to just sit with you, which is a wonderful form of contemplation. Rilke talks about it in a very famous quotation about living the questions. We all have lots of questions that will take years for us to get answers to. So we may not get them today. So let's begin with our first question.
Hello, hello, hello. I started practicing as a child in a discipline which is quite different than anything you do. And actually, I became a teacher of this tradition. And that tradition was alluded to, and that is science. And science as a tradition, as a discipline, has become the dominant one in our culture today. Now, one of the interesting things is that over the time that I was teaching, I was trying to teach the students one thing, and that is to understand reality. And I find that the Buddhist tradition is essentially trying to allow you to do the same thing, to see reality clearly and to understand it. And I wonder whether you teach your students using the Four Noble Truths, etc., to do that.
So the new science is going to be something that doesn't divide subject and object, isn't reductive, and all the paradigms that went with scientific materialism are being proven inaccurate. So we've lived for 500 years with one worldview, and we're at the tipping point of what Michel Foucault, a French philosopher, would say is a new episteme. If you look at, and this is more, because I'm sure you understand this if you're asking the question, but if you look at Dan Siegel's work, he has done, I think, a breathless presentation of what the new sciences will be. It will include the subjective voice, and so part of what we did today is we talked about ourselves. That wouldn't have been allowed a few years ago in any kind of scientific presentation. Secondly of all, we're poly-scholarships. Some of us are Buddhists, some of us are not. and yet we dip into the different traditions and use them because they counter-inform each other in a positive way. His Holiness has said that Buddhism is very scientific, and if the scientists find anything out that the Buddhists are incorrect around the 2,600-year-old tradition that's Buddhism will change. So far, science has changed, and changing so rapidly because of how Buddhism is leading us through the science with an understanding of what has just been the meditation tradition. So is that an answer to your question?
What I was more interested in is shifting the focus a little bit from happiness and suffering to the causes is that we don't see reality clearly, is what creates the suffering.
Okay, I think that's an important question, and we've heard it, and others may want to be thinking about it and talking with you about it. But let's hear some more questions.
I just wondered if anyone could talk about online learning and bringing mindfulness into that. I know it's on the rise. I'm an online teacher, and I just wondered how to be mindful online.
Thank you for that question. It seems like keeping up with technology is also a very important way to spread any body of work, including mindfulness. We just recently, because of the many people around the world that were asking for our programs, and as well as to learn mindfulness, addressed that through an online training program. And we had a lot of resistance from our faculty and quite a bit of discussion around, is that possible? Because truthfully, we all know mindfulness to be something that we want to share and learn as a body of work between human beings, eye to eye, develop community, and so on and so forth, and develop a practice. But from my short experience of teaching our first ever online training, which was 5 weeks for an hour and a half each session, we discovered that it was something we could do as long as the participants were committed to developing their own practice at home. So we are continuing on the way, and we also know that many organizations, Dan Siegel for one, Mindful Schools for another, many organizations outside of Mindfulness Without Borders are teaching their learnings and offerings online. So I think it's something to expect. It's certainly still in development, a work in progress.
Please, thank you.
Check. Okay. Thank you very much to the panel, to each of you for this insightful discussion. I think in listening, it occurred to me that one of the biggest problems teachers face these days with increasing class sizes would be the ability to give direct, even one-on-one attention to students when you're standing in front of a class with 30, 40, or sometimes even 50 students. It becomes just a temporal impossibility to give the attention that I know in my experience was always very formative, to have a teacher that really is there with you and sees you and is working directly with you. And last year I worked with a nonprofit in the States called 826 Valencia that makes it their mandate to find spaces for teachers and educators to make that one-on-one relationship possible in teaching and learning institutes where it can't happen in schools. So when I heard Jack and Mina start to speak about teachers developing their presence for their classroom, as well as John Bell at the end speaking of how a lot of people who leave the school system feel like it's because they weren't cared about in it, I wonder what resources or what can teachers do to really develop that presence for their students in the classroom. But of course, that's for everyone.
Well, I think one thing is that we can use a variety of groupings, right? We can use small groups. And moving from large group to small group, again, it's going to be difficult to do individual when you have 35. Again, I'm a believer in the circle. If you can set the class up as a circle, and I've had classes up to 35, and when it gets over 35, it becomes a problem. But you can still have a circle at 35. And of course, the circle comes from indigenous peoples. It's a long tradition that this is the most healing way that we can actually be together. And so I'm a strong believer in the circle, but also using other variety of, and things like tribes, which is a way to do small groups, and there are all kinds of support mechanisms for that. So those are just a few of the things that I would say.
That last one was a tribe?
Tribes, yeah. Gene Gibbs has written a book called Tribes, and many of our teachers in Ontario and Toronto are using it. It's a very powerful technique for dealing with large groups and breaking things down. It gives sort of guidelines to how the small groups can work, because you just can't put students in small groups and not give them some kind of a framework. Yeah.
I'd like to offer another idea. Sometimes I've seen teachers scratch their head, or youth workers scratch their head about what should we do about this issue when the answers are among the students. And I think if we changed our model from thinking we have to control and set it up to saying we're building a community together. This takes a lot of time up front, setting the rules together, making contracts, making agreements with each other. How do we want to treat each other? How do we want to talk to each other? Establish those things. What if somebody doesn't talk like that way? What should happen? Who should bring that up? How should we handle the discipline issues? If you create a collective experience, they're getting that sense of ownership, of democratic decision-making, of being mindful of how their behavior is part of the mix. It's much more, and you have much less behavior problems if you have 35 students helping to create the classroom culture. There's lots of other things. Use of constant appreciations and shout-outs. What I noticed Tommy doing well the other day. How about Jose? How did he do well as a leader? You know, you keep building a constant thing so that they then are inoculated with the sense of loving speech and respect and cooperation in the classroom. It doesn't eliminate every problem, but it goes a long ways.
I'm trying to still sort my thoughts as to what exactly my question is. Thank you, first of all, for the panel. My question is around working in a country or a continent like ours where there's so much social inequity, and those of us who are teaching, many of us are probably working in schools where much of the leadership and ourselves does not reflect the backgrounds of our students. And we're probably dealing with folks who are coming from backgrounds and inherited ancestry of inequity in our area. And my question is, and I was especially drawn to what John, you said in your biography in the book about working with creating spaces for sanghas of color and creating retreats even for people of color practicing this. And I'm wondering what you could say to us about what we can do to demonstrate our mindfulness and our sensitivity to that with our students, but also encourage us to release what we want to hold on to is our story of pain and suffering and how it's stopping us from going forward. And that's a very not politically correct thing to say. Encouraging us to release what pain we can, especially when it's around our identities of being a racial or ethnic one down to the rest of society. And so I'm curious what you would have to say to us about that.
I think I can try to respond. And maybe, I can have a conversation with you afterwards too, just to share my experience. I think the issue of difference is something that's definitely a very rich area for mindfulness practice, to be able to have that as just like an area of contemplation. So I think you even raising this question, I think is a very nice question. That would be the same even for me when I'm working with students that might be second language learners, and working through any sort of difference. So I appreciate your question. I think if I can share a little bit about the people of color retreat, is that sort of what you were interested in? I think that space there, I think, is a space that sometimes people might not fully understand, but I think it's an issue of safety. So maybe I can ask you, how do you communicate safety in your classroom, so that students feel like, whether they're different from you, that there's a sense of safety there, that they can do that. Or maybe you being able to share about resources that are available. So I think those are just maybe some quick things that are coming to mind, but I think those spaces, I know for me in terms of supporting that cultivation, it's a way to be safe so that you can actually go in and be able to explore some of the things that sometimes in other spaces that type of environment is not readily available, and there's sort of obstacles to being able to enter and explore inward. So, and if you want to talk later.
I'd like to add one thing to that, if I might. At our recent conference on mindfulness and education, we had psychologist Sam Himmelstein, who works with incarcerated youth. Most of the young people are members of gangs, perpetrators of violence, and victims of violence. And he talked about one of his colleagues in his organization who he described as a nerd. He said, this is the last person you would expect to be able to relate to the clientele. But in fact, this man has a wonderful relationship with these young people because he's completely comfortable with who he is, and he's completely authentic. And these young people feel his authenticity. And his authenticity allows them to be their true selves. And that's what's the most important. Not the differences, but the authenticity.
Hello. I work in French and American schools. I do intervention, teaching, meditation, and yoga. But I usually talk to the children, not so much to the teacher or the boss of the school. And basically, I'm looking for help and maybe resources to know the speech, to talk to teachers or big school, the people that give you the money, basically, to come into the school. And I'm also looking for resources to translate all the mindfulness that we learn in English in French.
What was her question really? She wants resources for working with teachers, especially.
I'm wondering if anybody in the hall could answer her. Raise your hand if you have some resources and that you could speak to her afterwards, okay? Yeah. And someone back there too.
And I also wanted to briefly mention the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning as a great resource. They have 5 competencies that are supposed to be taught sequentially of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and healthy decision-making. And if you just go to www.castle.org, there's a lot of information there, including research about improved, attention and focus and students who have social emotional learning interventions. I think the latest report have an increase of 11 percentile points on testing. So this is all language and information that would be really effective for administrators too.
Okay, and also to add, and I should imagine it's fairly typical, the .B program in the UK, if you go to it, has a paper on the evidence base and the curriculum's been translated into French. And I would imagine if you went to the Garrison website and looked at the various programs there that you would find quite a lot of resources. So there's 37 programs there. If you start clicking, you will find stuff, I'm sure.
Richard suggested I just quickly spell CASEL. It's CASEL.org. And they also have evidence-based programs up there and research as well. So.
It's in the UK, it's called the Mindfulness in Schools programme, and there's a free download of a paper on the evidence base for mindfulness in schools. It's just called Mindfulness in Schools. If you put UK, you'll find it, and it's called .B, which is a full stop with a small B after it. It means basically stop and breathe, or stop and be, and that's its logo. But I think the Garrison will also have some evidence-based papers, so there's quite a lot around if you start Googling.
Thank you.
You mentioned that singing about flowers may not necessarily reach teens effectively. So I'm just wondering if one of you can express what might be the best way to mindfully communicate with teenagers.
Okay, I wasn't trying to say that nobody should sing songs about flowers with kids, but again, just taking the Mindfulness in Schools program, because from the UK, which is a teens program, it basically does things that are quite edgy and exciting. For example, tasting, it's chocolate, but it's also hot chili, which excites some of the kids. The next one will shock you. We use a shock ball, which gives out mild electric shocks to illustrate aversion. It's very mild, I would say. We haven't lost too many yet. But things like using clips from films that are current, pop music, and so on, and using language. So you wouldn't use mindfulness. We use words like, mind lab or emotional warrior or something of that sort. You talk about sport. You talk about surviving life in a club. You basically start where they are. You need to. It comes down to knowing your teens and working out how you talk to them about anything, really, and then translating work on mindfulness into the kind of examples and language that you would use. There's loads of stuff in pop music that you can choose to play if you want to talk about being in the moment and ethics and so on. There's just a lot out there. You just kind of need to get the head on, which is seeing the world from the teens' point of view, and use the teens themselves to tell you, what works with that group. So there's a lot. It's really about the spectacles you put on before you start teaching, more than sort of specifics.
I'm speaking from a parent perspective rather than a teacher.
I would get someone else to teach them.
Just bringing mindfulness to boys, which is, I think, one of the things is sports, because there are a lot of people in the sports world that are using this. The classic book is Phil Jackson, who, is coach of was coach of the Chicago Bulls and the Los Angeles Lakers, and he brought mindfulness right into coaching. And there's a book called Buddhas and Boys, is about a teacher who taught mindfulness to high school football players. And I think boys, particularly if they can see the relationship to sports, that's a big inroad.
I don't think we're going to have time to answer all more questions right now. So, but there are going to be a lot of opportunities to raise questions of various kinds throughout the rest of the week. And after you leave here, there's a worldwide community of over 1,000 people who are interested in mindfulness and education, who are all part of the Mindfulness and Education Network's listserv. So many of you have already, how many people are already on this listserv? Would you raise your hand? Not, we don't have too many Canadian members yet, but it would be wonderful to have a large Canadian presence. The flyer is downstairs in the bookstore, and if you have questions such as the ones you've just been asking, you can just put them out on the network, and you will get very thoughtful answers. It's not a very busy listserv, so you don't need to worry about being flooded with emails, but it's very thoughtful. So I want to encourage all of you to pick up a flyer. We also have a conference annually. We have Canadians who come to our conference, and that gets announced. And it'll be March 14 through 16 in Washington, D.C. this next year. And there's a lot of resources on our website that you'll find also listed here.
I'd like to do one plug for a book that I found very nourishing. It's called Teaching with Fire. Two teachers asked teachers to send them poems that got them through hard times, that reminded them why they taught, that talked about courage. And so there's probably about 100 poems in here. On one side is the poem sent in by the teacher. On the other is the teacher's own story about why this poem was important. I have used this in my teaching, in my training work, and for my own personal, I've used poems to cry through beautiful, beautiful collection of poems. Some of them are familiar, some written by famous people, some by teachers themselves. Teaching with Fire.
Thank you.
The author, the editors, Sam Intrater and Megan Scribner, with Parker Palmer giving an intro.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, friends, for being with us. And wonderful in my heart. I feel the energy, the heart filled, and I see all of your face. Really just brightening up. I just want to end here, just remind everyone to come back to their basic practice, because I know that we've been stimulated, and don't let that pull you from who you are. And I think we've touched that, the truth of who you are and your practice in the present moment. So don't let anything tempt you and lose that, even if it's about teaching and education and all that. So we just come back to our breath, our steps, our basic things that will, actually all the things that we need is already in us, and we, with the practice, we can trust that. I think with the mother and as parents too, the teenage years, I've worked with a lot with teens, and the mindfulness has helped me a lot to really call out what it is that's happening in the present moment. And you can only do that calmly if you've done your own homework. So there's nothing that you cannot solve or deal with. So mindfulness is just an energy, it's not a technique. So that energy we can cultivate. And so you just, in the present moment, you could recognize and call out to the teenager, to the student, what it is, what is happening, but calmly, with a lot of love and compassion, miracles happen. And we all have experienced that, whatever arena we're in. So that's, I encourage you for the next hour, or as we eat lunch, don't think about this. Let it go. Come back to your steps, come back to your dinner. What it is that you're looking for is already in there, and I think we all know that already. That's why we're here, to actually cultivate that. So relearn the teaching mind. A teacher mind, which is, more things, more pieces of paper. We just let go and come back. So we'll end here with 3 sounds of the bell. for us to really enjoy this moment and to let this happiness and this, what we've touched here from the sharings, have giving us a lot of energy. And so we let that dissipate into all the teachers, all the students, all the young ones, all the parents out there who are all doing their best. May we end here? Can I teach you a song? Yes? Okay, I'll sing the first line, okay? The sun, it shines on everyone. 2, 3. The sun, it shines on everyone. Again. The sun, it shines on everyone. And then look at everyone. No discrimination. No discrimination. And the rain, okay? The rain, it falls on everyone. The rain, it falls on everyone. No discrimination. No discrimination. My heart belongs to everyone. My heart belongs to everyone. No discrimination. No discrimination.